Hi, this is Subratha and welcome to Upper Learning Resources. And today we're going to be looking at how to tell if your child is dyslexic. This is going to be a two-part video series where in the first part we'll be looking at what are the usual milestones for children, and we'll be looking at handwriting samples from exemplification materials from the government and especially from reception all the way up to year 6. We're pretty much focusing on primary school children today. And in the second part, that's when we're going to be looking at examples, writing samples from dyslexic children and then comparing them to children who are neurotypical individuals, that is to say children who don't really have a label as such. And we'll be comparing the two. So this way, hopefully that will give you an idea of where your child should be for their age, and you can compare these writing samples with your own child's writing to give you a bit of an idea as to whether your child may be dyslexic or not. Let's get started. So I'm just going to adjust my second camera here. I do apologise that it can be a little bit shaky, so I'm going to try my best not to shake it around too much. And in front of me, I have got some writing samples of children from each year group. So starting with year 1 children, and I got these writing samples, these exemplification materials from Featherstone Primary School, who have absolutely fantastic exemplification materials published on their website. So do check them out if you want to see these writing samples for yourself. Check out the link in the description below. So year 1 children, their handwriting generally looks a little like this. You can see that not all the writing is the same size. So year 1 children, they would have had some practice writing in reception and nursery already. In nursery, they're looking at mark making and the fact that making a mark on the page has meaning. Usually that's the focus in nursery, and they're learning about writing through play. In reception, that is explored in a little bit more detail. So they're learning how to write their letters, they're forming their letters, learning how to hold a pencil properly. They are learning which way round the letters go, and they learn to write their name. In reception and nursery, that's pretty much the main focus. So by the time they get to year 1, they should be able to produce a piece of work like this. Now, I have to say that, Featherstone Primary School must have some really brilliant children, because something like this in year 1 is absolutely amazing. So the fact that they've got really brilliant pieces of work here, just bear in mind that this really is the top end of what the children can produce for that year group. So in year 1, they learn about writing full stops, capital letters, what is the function of a sentence, what does a sentence have inside of it. So you're looking at full stops and capital letters, describing words, all of these type of things. We're not really looking for them to join up at this stage, but I know that this particular work, you can see that this child has some beautiful joined up handwriting. Not all the letters go the right direction, so you can see some of the letters here lean to the left and some of them lean to the right. And at this age, that's perfectly fine. So here, you can see that they're learning to write questions, so using punctuation, using question marks, understanding that punctuation marks serve a function. This is all covered in year 1. Generally, I would consider a year 1's handwriting to look a little bit like this. If they're not joined up, it really isn't the end of the world right now, because at this age, they're still learning language, they're still exploring with language, their speech is still developing. So really, any kind of possible dyslexia, by year 1, it's still too early to tell. We'll look at that in more detail in part 2. So here, a child has been able to transfer everything that they've learned in their English lessons into their RE writing here. So they should be able to use everything that they've learned in their lessons, and they can transfer it to other lessons. Depending on the type of script that the school is teaching the children, usually they will write in this sort of a fashion. You know, you've got your ascenders and descenders here. That's the lines that come in and come out, but they don't really join it yet. So here the child is using the right cursive script but isn't doing joined up handwriting. So you find this can be quite typical for year one as well. As in this example here, you can see that the letters might not always be the same size. And in my experience, children usually, the writing in year one sort of looks like this or like this. Now, as we saw before, something like this, especially if you look at, so something like this, if you look at the amount that the child has written, that's really quite a lot as well. Again, it's the top end for year one. Even if they write half this amount, that's totally, in my experience, that's sort of been the average. So handwriting like this tends to be the sort of average for year one. So if your child is writing to this sort of degree and is in year one, then you can rest assured that they're where they need to be for their age. Even if their writing isn't joined up or isn't quite there yet, in this age group, it's not really that much of a concern because their language is still developing. Year two. Now, this has been taken from the gov.uk website, where they publish their exemplification materials so that teachers can make their own teacher assessments that is part of year two. Especially now that they've got rid of the SATs, this is the way that children's writing are assessed. So this is really good because this is a government standard which they have published so that teachers can use this as a reference point in order to make their assessments. So this is a child called Kim. Their names have been changed. And you can see here that this is a child that is working to at the expected standard. So this is somebody who is at age-related expectations. They are working at the expected standard. And something like this is what they would expect a year two child to produce. Now, just to be aware that some of these writing samples would have been taken throughout the year, so the writing samples would get better with time. In the beginning, this is probably when they first went into year two, so you know they're still writing similar to a year one standard here. And then as you can see, the child's writing, and as you can see, the child's writing sort of gets better with time. So this is a description here. And if I sort of zoom out there, you can see the whole piece of work. Let me just adjust that. So in the beginning, we had something like this. Then we have something like this. Not really sure at which order this was done. And then you can see how the writing gets a lot better as the child gets older here. So this is something that would be classed as at age-related expectations for year two. So if you look at some of the features of what a year two piece of writing would have, you really have much better sentence structure. The child really understands what sentences are for. They're using a better range of punctuation. They'll have nailed full stops and question marks by this point. And they're starting to use commas. So, and even exclamation marks. Their spelling is a lot better and their sentences really flow on one to the other. And the stories start getting a bit more interesting too. Meet Fred. Fred loves to find things. One day, Fred said to his mum, "I'm bored." So here, we've got a little spelling mistake here, but note the use of apostrophes. So really, the work seems to have a lot more flow to it. Also notice that this child isn't using paragraphs. So generally, a year two piece of work would look a little like this. Year three, children are starting to use paragraphs now. Have a look at the Featherstone exemplification materials again here. Now they're using paragraphing structure. They're able to write a whole lot more within the time that they're given. So I think these are different children here. They're their work is structured. Sometimes they can have headings or subheadings. And the paragraphs would have a flow to it as well. So the handwriting has evened out a lot more, as you can see here. And their stories would take on a much more of a depth. They will be analysing character, they will be bringing characters' emotions into it. So we're starting to use higher order vocab. Here's another example. They should be able to proof their work using a higher range of punctuation like ellipsis here, and starting to use complex sentences as well. They're thinking about the right vocab choices to really create the right imagery. And they're starting to use pronouns more. If you also note that they're starting to use better connectives here. While Edward was on the floor, an old lady lands Edward and uses him as a scarecrow. Lands Edward, is that right? Or hands Edward? Not quite sure about this word here. Note here that they are using better adjectives, so not just a lady, but an old lady. And they're using these conjunctions like the word who. So here, a kind boy called Bryce took him to his sick sister, who is very, very poorly. So you've just got those extension in the sentences there. So you'll find that they're playing a lot more with language, and they're understanding that sentences can be constructed a bit like Lego blocks, so that whatever one type of sentence is, they can break that sentence and mix it around and have complex sentences. And they're starting to play with languages and sentences a little bit. And again, they should be able to transfer these writing styles to their other subjects. But we're not expecting them in Year 3 to be able to master conjunctions, as you can see in this example. After that, the coach took off, and in an instant we were at the fabulous place, Cadbury World. As soon as we arrived, I exploded with happiness. Meanwhile, we were waiting for the tickets to be ordered. So here the child doesn't really understand how to use the word meanwhile, but it's really amazing to see that this person is having a go. So you'll find that some of the children love the philosophy, bung it in there and let's see what happens, but this is how they learn. So it's great to see that the children will be using these higher order conjunctions to really deepen their work, but they might not quite be there yet. They might not be using it perfectly yet. So that's Year 3. By the time they get to Year 4, writing has become a lot more fluid. You should find that children are able to write on autopilot without really having to put too much effort into sentence encoding. So in the beginning, it will feel laboured for them to write. It's still an effort, spelling is still an issue. But by the time they get to Year 4, all of this stuff should have ironed itself out. So in the same way, when somebody first learns to drive and they're looking at gears, they're looking at the mirrors, they're looking at the road, and it can be a bit overwhelming with all of the different things that they have to do, eventually it gets to a point where you can drive without really thinking about it. And in the same way, writing should become like that by the time they get to Year 4. They're not really thinking about it. All they're thinking about is the story and what it is that they want to convey, but they're not really putting too much effort into the actual encoding of the written script. So see here, you are now seeing lots of paragraph starters. So these are the things that help with the flow of the paragraph. So in the distance, suddenly, you've got great sentence starters here. And here is an example that shows this child who has probably done this entire piece of work in one lesson. Usually a lesson can last an hour, and if it's a piece of long write, then we're looking at an hour and a half. which is fantastic. You've got paragraphs here, everything is organized. They've got diagrams and you've got subtitles here for clarity. So really, organisation of work takes a big priority in Year 4. Now, children by this stage understand that readers have to have an active role in reading too. So when they're writing a story, they don't always write things so literally. They are becoming mini authors themselves and they're making the readers work for it. So they'll put little clues in there and not reveal the plot twist straight away. Here's an example. Whenever she came to them, they acted very peculiar. So the child isn't revealing the crux of the story straight away, but is increasing suspense and intrigue. And this is a stylistic this is a choice that the child has made. So you'll find that in Year 4, they put these devices into their writing to deepen their work. They're using a mixture of similes, metaphors, personification, and all of this higher end grammatical stuff. So you can see that the handwriting really has evened itself out now, including spelling too. And an important thing is that they're not making mistakes with any of their verb choices anymore. So past tense, present tense, future tense is all clear in their mind, and they're able to use was, were, will, all in the correct way. They should also be very comfortable with using irregular verbed past tense words, such as see and saw, and really shouldn't be making any tense mistakes. So as they're getting older, let me put this higher up so you can see. So as they're getting older, you can see that the handwriting has really evened out really nicely. They're starting to use speech, all of the speech rules. So you've got new person, new line coming in here, and they're using different words for said. So come on, Zero, hurry up, whispered Stanley. Zero hesitated and realised he had no choice. He carefully followed. So it's really, the pieces of writing are really starting to be very detailed. Mini authors. So that's Year 4. In Year 5, everything just becomes so much deeper. They're able to play with their sentences and come up with lots of different types of complex sentences. They can use fronted adverbials. They will know what the difference is between passive and active voice, and they're using stylistic choices to increase suspense for the reader. They will have nailed spelling and punctuation. They should also be able to use parentheses, so adding extra information in brackets and within dashes and so on, especially with commas. They might use more than one subordinate clause within their sentence, and their descriptions are generally so much more detailed and is able to create a vivid, detailed imagery. So here's an example of a Year 5 piece of work, again from the Featherstone Primary School website, which is absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend that you check it out. They've really got a lot of the details in here so that you can see exactly what it is that the children are expected to do for that year group. They're able to use semicolons effectively, especially in lists, using commas in lists, and maybe even using semicolons with having a list within a list. What's that, Year 6? They're using really higher end vocabulary and higher end punctuation now. Paragraphs are flowing. With some children, their handwriting might not be as neat, but that's not really an issue here, as long as they are using all of the higher order features that they're meant to be using for their age. Their language becomes a lot more emotive. They're able to transfer emotions from the character and be able to write as if they were that character and put themselves into the character's shoes. They're really exploring character, personality, emotions, all of these things to bring life to their piece of work. And see, this child here is using short sentences for impact. Look, I have to save Polly. That infers so much emotion and the conviction of this character. They're able to write correct introductions and conclusions. They're able to use adverbials to open a paragraph, and they are usually very consistent in their language, no matter which subject they are writing for. Finally, we come to Year 6. This piece of work has been taken from the gov.uk website, also published under exemplification materials for teacher assessment. Just like in Year 2, Year 6 SATs has also been scrapped, and the teacher would use the criteria from the government list to be able to assess whether a child is working towards expected standard, at expected standard, or working within greater depth. So this child, Morgan, again, names have been changed, is working at the expected standard. So if I zoom out here, so as you can see, really in Year 6, they should be able to consolidate everything that they have learned in school to be able to produce pieces of work which are really detailed, in depth, using all of the higher order vocabulary, punctuation, sentence structure to a wide range of effects. They will be able to think about the stylistic choices that they want to use and why, what kind of impact that they want to have on the reader. They should be able to use speech and dialogue to affect, to move along the story, emotive language to elicit an emotional response from the reader, and using a wide range of punctuation and grammatical sentence structures. So you can see here, in terms of length, this child has produced 4 sides of A4. And I would have thought this is a long write, so they would have had 1.5 hours to do this piece of work, something like this. This is another child. This is a short story. This is Lee, also working at the expected standard. You can see the handwriting is quite different, but still the same features. You've still got speech, you still have paragraph structure, and you still have higher order sentence structure and vocabulary. So something like this would be typical of a Year 6 child. I'm not going to go into too much detail into all of the criteria that needs to be met for a child to reach working at age-related expectations, working at the expected standard. That will be another video later on. But what I would like to point out is just generally give you a guideline as to roughly what a child's piece of work should look like that is congruent with their age. So we're going to use this now, and in the next video we will look at what a dyslexic child's piece of work looks like and use it to compare where they are in relation to some of these other children's work, which are exemplary pieces of work, that is how examples of how it should look for their age. And using that, you can use that as a guide to be able to see if you think your child has dyslexia. Now, bear in mind, this is something that is intended only as a guide. If you feel that your child does have dyslexia, then I strongly recommend that you get a medical professional, a diagnostician, to be able to assess dyslexia properly in the correct way. Usually you would go to an educational psychologist for this, and the process for that is something we will look at in another video as well. So join me in part 2, where we will be looking at examples of work written by a dyslexic child. Take care for now. See you next time.